All right, welcome everybody to today's webinar, the Academic Freedom Syllabus. If you need it, if you need closed captioning, you can click the CC or Show Captions button in your Zoom menu bar, and they'll be available through Zoom AI. I am excited to welcome you to today's webinar, the Academic Freedom Syllabus. I am Jason Gilbo with ASHE, and I am joining you today from the lands of the Chitimacha here in Southern Louisiana. Really excited about today's webinar and our partnership with AAUP Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom. I will be with you throughout the webinar as your staff person, so if any technical issues arise, please feel free to message me. Also want to remind people that when you registered, you agreed to our events code of conduct. I'm going to share that in the chat as well. Hopefully and ideally, we won't have any issues, but just in case we do have procedures in place. If anything comes up, feel free to message or email me. And with that, I will turn it over to Isaac and Tim to introduce themselves, share a little bit about themselves, and jump into today's webinar. And then for folks attending, I also encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Isaac, Tim, over to y'all.
Tim, do you want to introduce yourself because this is your home turf?
Sure. My name is Tim Cain. I am a faculty member at the University of Georgia, coming to you from the historic homelands of the Muskogee, and from an institution that for decades relied on the labor of enslaved people to exist. I teach at the University of Georgia's Louise McBee Institute of Higher Education. I'm an associate editor for ASHE's Review of Higher Education. Most of my research is on issues of faculty unionization, student protests, and as you might guess, academic freedom. And I trace that focus in part back to a spur of the moment decision more than almost 25 years ago to attend the Davis Markert Nickerson Lecture on Academic and Intellectual Freedom at the University of Michigan. During the talk, a speaker expressed concern that young people didn't care about academic freedom and went so far as to ask everybody in the room under the age of 40 to stand up. There were more than 100 people, maybe 120 people in the room, and 3 of us stood up. And that helped make me commit to spending part of my time focusing on and studying academic freedom and led me down the path that led me to working with Isaac at the for the Defense of Academic Freedom.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim. My name is Isaac Kamola. I teach political science at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm the current director of the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, which is a Mellon-funded project at the AAUP. And the project really comes out of this observation that me and the then director of research, York Teed, we're having this conversation that exactly like Tim said, not many people understand what academic freedom is. Not many faculty understand what academic freedom is. And then when you have an astroturfed right-wing faux populist attack on higher education, it becomes really hard to defend academic freedom if the broader public also doesn't understand what academic freedom is. So academics kind of find themselves caught in this double bind. And in a way, the AAUP has very, very good, solid policy about how to protect faculty from their employers, right? So when a university fires a faculty or sanctions a faculty. But as we know now, the attacks on academic freedom, as we saw just yesterday with Columbia, are coming from the president's offices, from the executive branch, from the Department of Education itself, not to mention online trolls, state governments, state legislatures, and this kind of proliferation of attack on academic freedom. So the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom was really set up to kind of try to wrap our heads around this evolving threat matrix and also to develop resources and tools for pushing back on against these attacks. And so Tim Cain is one of the 15 fellows that we have at the center. There's 15 fellows who come together, meet regularly to talk about kind of what we can do in the face of this onslaught. And one of the ideas that came out now about a year ago was to create an academic freedom syllabus. And the idea is to create a syllabus that would make it easy to teach academic freedom in our own classes. So as Tim said, we could be teaching graduate students, a first-year faculty orientation, undergrad classes that you can. So we've basically created a module that could be like an hour to 2 hour module that you can slot into any class, right? And you can adapt it. And we've created the resources to be able to adapt it to particular settings, and to really kind of give you something to start with. And the idea is that if more and more graduate students and young faculty and senior faculty and faculty in general kind of know what academic freedom is, then we as a profession will be in a better position to be able to defend ourselves. And so basically the module starts with an activity, which we're going to do here in a second, just so you can kind of get a sense of what that activity is. And then Tim is going to talk about kind of his experience teaching academic freedom. So he has a lot of experience, much more than me, teaching academic freedom. He's going to talk a little bit about kind of the value of academic freedom and teaching it in the classroom. And then at the end of this presentation, I'll just go through the website and kind of give an overview of what resources we have as part of this academic as syllabus module. So you'll be able to see what lives there. Does that sound good? We're all cool? Okay. So let me share my screen here. This is the first activity from the academic freedom syllabus. And so you could see that the class session itself would start with this activity. There is a little bit of a historical presentation, and then we provide a series of discussion questions. And I'll go through those when we look at the syllabus itself. But let's just do this activity. So the activity starts with just this general question that we can use to start. So just kind of a shout out what you all think. So in general, what are the general arguments concerning the importance of free speech in a democratic society? So the idea, the first step of the syllabus is to try to grapple around this question of what's the difference between free speech and academic freedom. You know, a lot of people think of academic freedom and conflate it with free speech. We want to start the module by just thinking about what this difference is. So just as a starting question, what are the arguments that are made to defend academic freedom? You can just shout them out.
Here's what I found.
Oh. Apparently AI knows. What are some arguments that people make about the importance of academic freedom? Why is academic freedom important in a democratic society?
Free speech or academic freedom?
Free speech, sorry.
Well, I think first people will say that it's protected by the Constitution, right? Have an amendment to the Constitution that says we guarantee the right to free speech in society.
Yeah. So it's a constitutional protection. Why else is it important to kind of for democracy? What role does it say and play in protecting a democratic society?
Get the marketplace of ideas argument.
Right. So exchange, and that you create ideas and the best ideas kind of float to the top. What else?
I think sometimes people try to make the argument about the importance of having different perspectives in the media, for instance, right? That we would want to protect the media. I know that that's like a kind of separate constitutional thing, but the idea that people view the world from different perspectives and they might report the news differently, they might dialogue about things differently.
Yeah. So just a recognition that there's lots of different understandings of what truth is, or that different understandings of what the world is about, and that having these conversations across differences and bringing a different kinds of experiences into that marketplace of ideas is an important part of what it means to be in a democracy. And if you have a kind of authoritarian figure saying this is truth, this is not truth, then that threatens democracy. Well, what we want to do is, so in 1950, it probably, as many of you know, Oklahoma instituted a loyalty oath requiring the state employees, including university professors, pledge allegiance to the United States. In a really important Supreme Court decision in the kind of the legal, the creation of a legal precedent around academic freedom, Justice Felix Frankfurter issued a concurring decision which basically laid out why such a loyalty oath was particularly threatening to academics in particular. So let's take a look at that quote. And as you look at this and kind of read this quote, I kind of helped by highlighting and underlining some stuff that I thought would be helpful. But what do you notice as being kind of in this explanation as to why the profession, why the university, why faculty and academic freedom is so important? And are those the same reasons why freedom of speech is important per se? Just take a quick question, a quick look. How is it that Felix Frankfurter is talking about what faculty do and why their particular kind of speech is important?
He's making an argument that faculty and teachers in general sort of create the conditions for freedom of speech to happen and flourish and work.
Right.
That we help to provide the structure that allows people to do inquiry in different types of ways.
Right.
I'm also noticing like this sense of developing responsible citizens who are capable of inquiry and dialogue in that way.
Right. Great. So it's not just this question of you have the right as an individual to say what's on your mind, but the faculty actually have this obligation to kind of create the conditions, to instill the practices, the responsibilities, to kind of help students understand what it means to be having a conversation in a democratic society. And then that's different from engaging in that conversation itself, but to have that very to instill certain practices and to teach students and to model how free speech should look in a democratic society. Okay, great. I'll stop there, but you can kind of see that's the opening activity, is this kind of question around trying to disaggregate the difference between academic of freedom and free speech. I'll go back to kind of provide an overview of what the syllabus looks like and what the resources are. But I thought it would be great if Tim could kind of give us some of his experience teaching academic freedom and what he's found and thoughts about that.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac. So as Isaac just said, he asked me to talk about my experiences teaching, why I do it, about academic freedom specifically. And it's something that I do every fall to master's and doctoral students. It's something that I think is important because most graduate students don't understand academic freedom or the norms of the faculty. I actually would argue, and Isaac said it earlier, that most faculty don't understand truly what academic freedom and shared governance and related principles are. A few years ago, I was working on what became an unfunded research proposal, grant proposal. At the time, I was very hopeful it would be funded, but did a literature review on how doctoral students learn sort of the norms of the profession. And there was a consensus in the literature that they learn them from their mentors, which is fine, makes sense. But if you follow the literature trail back, the literature trail of citations goes back to a single piece in the 1970s that has a sentence that says, graduate students in the sciences learn the norms of faculty life from their mentors, full stop, right? And so I think this is something that we need to think about, we need to talk about, and we need to do it as part of a formal curriculum, not just expect that students are going to learn it through osmosis. So in my Higher Ed in the US course, which is a broad survey for new graduate students in the field of higher education, I have 2 3-hour sessions on workers in higher education, one of which largely emphasizes non-faculty workers, student affairs workers, custodial workers, others, and the other largely centers faculty. And I dedicate about an hour of that second one to academic freedom. The readings vary year to year, but I often have students read the 1940 Statement of Principles, which of course is thought of as the AAUP's 1940 statement, but it was actually a negotiated shared document with the group that's now AAC&U. It was actually done in light of political pressure being put on the AAUP by the AFT, and sort of forced the AAUP and the AAC to get together to create this document that became the foundation for modern understandings of academic freedom and tenure. So I have students read that, and I often have them read another chapter or article or two. And then in class, we undertake several activities to help explain ideas, to raise questions, and to introduce modern challenges. I often use a case study where students are given a short vignette of a faculty member's actions and then are tasked with trying to figure out which of those actions and speech events should be protected by principles of academic freedom and which aren't protected by academic freedom, as a way of trying to tease out and make some distinctions. So for example, not allowing students who get below a C on your in your course to fill out faculty evaluations, not protected by academic freedom, right? But there are other things that could be. So I do that, and usually in my classes, I rarely lecture. But I often do provide a short lecture on the history of academic freedom, covering how there was no true idea of academic freedom in early US higher education. It was adopted later, sort of brought in ideas that were emanating from German Humboldtian universities that then of free speech and freedom to teach had US ideas of freedom of expression grafted onto them to create our US understandings of academic freedom. In Germany, there was no expectation of freedom of political speech for faculty. Faculty members were appointees of the government and couldn't speak out on political issues, something I think seems to be in vogue right now. But so I worked through that up to the early controversies in the US, the founding of the AAUP, the 1915 Declaration, all the way up through the modern era, concluding with some of the challenges that we're facing today. Since students have read things like the 1940 statement, I try to make it interactive and have them talk about those things. And throughout, try to, when conveying the history, try to hold to Hofstadter and Metzger's idea that the history of academic freedom isn't a history of famous cases. Those are part of it, but they're not all of it. It's just like the history of unionization isn't just a history of strikes, right? There's a lot more of policy development, of challenges, of changing ideas that's going on that are informing where we got to today. So as I think about what when I teach, whether it's in the lecture and the discussions, and the discussion is more of the class than the lecture, I try to emphasize a number of points on academic freedom that I think are really important that I want our students, my students, to hold on to. So the first is that academic freedom is the condition of work that allows universities to do the work that society asks them to do. If society wants higher education to create new knowledge, to teach rather than indoctrinate, and to help solve problems, faculty must be free to do their work. The faculty, not administrators or legislators or elected national officials, are the ones most prepared and best positioned to offer judgment on what should and should not be studied and taught. Second is that academic freedom is a community right rather than a personal privilege. The norms and policies do protect individuals, but they do for the greater good, again, so that higher education can do its work. Third, academic freedom has never meant anything goes. Not everything a faculty member might do or say is protected. Academic freedom does not, for example, give a faculty member the right to sexually harass someone, right? There were actually debates over where academic freedom ends and sexual harassment begins in the 1980s and 1990s. Just as significantly within disciplines or areas, there are ideas that lack credibility and evidence, and that advocacy of them might demonstrate unfitness. The simple example that I often use in my class is that a geography professor who teaches and argues that the earth is flat might be deemed by their peers not to be fit to be a geography professor. There is, in fact, a paradox, though, here, because the closer that an area is to a scholar's expertise, the less freedom that they actually have, right? So, for example, being a flat earther might raise questions about a geographer's fitness for their position, but it would not for a theater professor's fitness, right? Put another way, my fundamental lack of understanding of nuclear physics is fine. It's defensible. It's protected by academic freedom. But if my arguments about the history of education were indefensible and lacked evidence, that wouldn't be protected in the same way. Next, I think broad faculty decisions can impinge on individual faculty rights without necessarily violating academic freedom. So when we think about curricular decisions that are sometimes made by a larger group, right? So if the math department faculty as a whole get together and decide for curricular coherence, we're going to use this same textbook and stat software in Calc 1 and 2. that can be required as a faculty decision that might feel like it's impinging on the autonomy of an individual instructor, but in fact is acceptable because it's a broader faculty curricular decision. It would be different if an administrator by fiat said, you're using this textbook that my friend wrote, and he's going to get a lot of royalties, or she's going to get a lot of royalties. But if the faculty as a whole are controlling the curriculum, it's fine. I also think, and this is something that probably feels weird in this specific moment, but I think it's important for us to remember throughout, we often think about the big controversies over extramural speech when we're talking about academic freedom. They're fundamentally important and we need to think about them. But just as important are the mundane ones, the intramural speech issues that don't make the news. In many eras, there are more violations of faculty members' intramural speech, that is the speech that faculty members undertake about their institutions, than there are about extramural speech violations. In the last 35 years, almost 40% of AAUP Committee A cases and reports written have been about intramural speech issues. So as an example, and this one's from much longer ago, in the 1930s, Emil Lorch, director of the School of Architecture at the University of Michigan, fired a faculty member saying there was no money in the budget for his salary, and simultaneously hired his daughter's fiance for the same position. That was unethical, unjust, was a violation of academic freedom. But then one of the instructor's colleagues complained and said, this is unethical. This is no way to run an institution. That faculty member was then fired in violation of his intramural speech rights, his rights to criticize his institution. So even though we need to focus on these external things, we also need to remember that throughout, there are faculty members whose intramural speech rights are being violated as well. Next, I always, our modern tenure system was created for two purposes: a form of compensation and to attract qualified people to the profession, and to protect faculty to allow them to do their work. It was an outgrowth of Depression-era economics and politics, and really became entrenched with the widespread acceptance of the 1940 statement. And it worked okay for about 2 decades. And then starting in the 1970s with mass retrenchment and then the neoliberal policies that have been adopted since, it fundamentally fell apart. Tenure's not perfect, and it doesn't provide as much protection as many seem to think it does, but it remains the best defense of academic freedom. That means that the fact that 75% of instructors work off the tenure track is an existential threat to academic freedom and thus higher education's ability to serve society. The key to tenure protections is not that faculty can't be fired, they can be fired, or can't be otherwise punished. It's that there need to be affirmative steps to dismiss a tenured faculty member, ideally with due process, faculty involvement, all of those other things. The ability for administrators to silently non-renew non-tenure line faculty is a tremendous weapon that can be used to control ideas and actions. Finally, when I'm teaching my students and trying to have these conversations, I try to remind them that academic freedom is an ideal that's never been fully secure. It does not need attention now because of the state legislative efforts and the federal tax. It has always needed it. I read an article in Inside Higher Education about a decade ago that was titled something like Academic Freedom's Golden Age. It was a discussion about how good it was for academic freedom in the long 1960s. The idea of a golden age is facially absurd, and certainly didn't apply to people who didn't share my racial and gender and sexual privileges. But there were more than that. There were enough known infringements. Angela Davis, Staunton Lynn, many faculty members from historically Black colleges who were refrained from doing civil rights work or fired from doing civil rights work, that even if things looked better in the 60s than they did during the height of McCarthyism, for example, academic freedom was still under threat because it always has been. This year, when I talk about that in class, I'm going to talk about how even when the current crisis passes, we can't forget about the importance of academic freedom. If and when things slow down, if and when things get better, hopefully they will at some point, we need to continue to push to understand and to try to achieve the lofty ideals of academic freedom. So that's what I try to do in the hour or so that I teach in that class. I also teach more of it in the history of higher ed class that I teach in the spring semester. But I'll pause. I probably said too much, and pass things back to Isaac.
Great, thanks, Tim. I really wish that everybody could have that class that Tim just taught. And unfortunately, Tim can't be in every class everywhere. So what we've tried to do is design a syllabus that you could take up and apply, and to kind of provide the resources to help kind of start those kinds of conversations. So let me show you what we've done. This is the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom's website. And if you go to the Academic Freedom Syllabus tab, what we've done one thing we provided some academic freedom syllabus language. So this is language that can be taken from the website here, and placed onto any course as a syllabus in your kind of like overview of your syllabus. So here, wait, where is that? Oh, shoot. We were just updating the website today, and this link is going to the wrong place. But basically, if you click on this link in an hour or two, you will see that it brings you to a kind of actual syllabus language. Let's see if I can pull that up. No. That. Here we go. So basically, this came out of conversations that we had with the fellows about how you can teach, or kind of how you can include academic freedom into all your conversations in class. So basically, this will be on the website shortly. But basically, we developed this kind of academic of freedom syllabus language that can just be cut and paste and put into any syllabus, explaining kind of your commitment to academic freedom and what that looks like in your classroom. But instead of just providing that syllabus language, we've also provided some of the conceptual understandings of academic freedom. So how does the AAUP understand academic freedom in the classroom in particular? What are the different policies that it has on academic freedom, to kind of give you some kind of conceptual background? And then also recognizes that kind of laying on to your students, here's the AAUP policy on this, that, and the other thing, is not necessarily the best pedagogical approach. So then laying out kind of the principles behind what that means in practice. So that, as Tim was saying, academic freedom is really based on this idea of ongoing disciplinary debates and disciplinary expertise. So make sure that your syllabus language includes an understanding of academic freedom is taking place within disciplinary and scholarly conversations. This means that people should be able to share their rights and viewpoints in the classroom, that such speech should be non-discriminatory, and that students have the right to object and to raise their own concerns, but doing so within an understanding that that's taking place within these scholarly debates. And so that kind of is laying out the thinking behind this particular language here. So the idea is that this can provide a little bit a bit of language that could be added to any course syllabus, to like having it in the syllabus then makes it possible on that first day of class, when you're going over the syllabus, to be able to say, hey, let's use a few minutes here at the beginning of class to talk about what academic freedom is. So in addition to that syllabus language, we've also created this academic freedom module, and which includes, this is that 1 to 2 hour kind of session that you could teach in a graduate student seminar, for a first year faculty orientation, professional development course, or even use as a campus discussion group. As at University of Michigan, they zoomed me into a faculty senate meeting in which we talked about materials on the academic freedom syllabus as a way to get the faculty senate thinking about issues of academic freedom. So we have a reading. This is a great overview chapter on academic freedom by 2 of my heroes, Jennifer Ruth and Ellen Schrecker. That's in a forthcoming book that Johns Hopkins has graciously let us pre-release as part of the syllabus. But then what might also be interesting for folks is that we also have a lesson plan. Right. So if you don't necessarily know or have if you can't do what Tim does, right, in terms of that kind of broad depth of knowledge of academic freedom, what we've done is put together these just a lesson plan that starts with the opening activity, which we just did, and this brings you to the PowerPoint with the quote from Felix Frankfurter on it. We also have a academic of freedom lecture presentation that is coming soon, as we're working on it, that has slides that go into the history of American higher education, the history of the AAUP, the 1915 Declaration, the 1940 Statement, the statements on shared governance, and some kind of big thinking about how academic freedom has evolved in the American context, as well as then some discussion questions. And so the idea is that you could take any or all of this material and adapt it to your own classroom. We also have a list here in the of additional readings. So if you are being an instructor, or you're teaching the class, and you want to kind of get a little bit more of a deeper understanding of academic freedom, here's some selected readings that you could do as kind of background information in preparation to lead that class. And then also, we have a list here of different ways that you could modify that curriculum. So if you wanted to talk about academic freedom and contingent faculty, for example, you can here's some suggested readings that you can add into that syllabus. If you're academic freedom, if you're in a medical school, you could talk, this statement could help teach about academic freedom in the medical school. So that's an overview of kind of the materials that are part of the academic freedom syllabus and are either online or will be shortly. And that's that. So just one, I would love to know if you have any questions or thoughts, or in any questions for Tim about how to teach academic freedom, and would love to have any feedback, like what kind of resources would be helpful for you to have, and yeah, Paul.
Hey, thanks so much. Okay, I teach in a higher education and student affairs program. I want to know about, how does academic freedom apply to staff? Because often it's talked about in relation to faculty members and, tenure processes and things like classroom spaces. But in the out of classroom spaces where so much of the work of colleges and universities occurs, that's also a space of open and critical inquiry. So how does academic freedom apply to like student affairs professionals, people that work in staff roles that do educational work outside the formal classroom environment?
Tim, do you want to take that one? I'm also happy to jump on it.
Some of actually Isaac's work might be useful in thinking about this, but I think that, traditionally you're right. The way that academic freedom was defined in foundational statements was a faculty right, a corporate faculty right, but a faculty right. In the early statements, it was tied to professionalism and work being done professionally, and the spirit and tenor of a scholar, a lot of those things. I think what you're also saying is exactly right, in that much of the teaching that is done by people in higher education is done by people who aren't tenure line faculty members, whether they're graduate students in a classroom, whether they're student affairs officers, whether they're others. And so part of the challenge is that the way we've talked about and built up protections, as vulnerable as those protections are, it's for a small group of educators in higher education. And a much more expansive notion, a much more inclusive notion of academic freedom would then apply those same principles to other employees in higher education who are doing educative work. Right now, we can go further and argue for workplace democracy and things that are more broadly applicable outside of higher education as well, and would be more inclusive that way. But as often thought about, academic freedom is confined to faculty, as I think many people who advocate for more human institutions and for better workplace rights, the concept should be applied much more broadly. We just haven't provided the protections much more broadly through our policy creations. In some ways, the 1915 Declaration is both a beautiful document that has some of my favorite language on academic freedom in it, and is very narrowly confined to a small group of quote unquote experts doing specific work. And so part of Isaac, I'm gonna reveal something here. One of the things we're working on with the center is an edited book. And one of the things that I'm excited about is a piece that Isaac is going to co-author about sort of expanding notions of academic freedom beyond what the traditional document said, to be more inclusive of a broader array of people's rights, of students' rights. One of the things that we do when we're talking in our group in CDAP is we talk more about the freedom to teach and the freedom to learn than we do about academic freedom. Because in some ways, academic freedom, while it's what I do, it's very important to me. There's also baggage to that term. And if we think about freedom to teach and freedom to learn, then the protection should apply more broadly.
Yeah, that's really important. It's a really important question because the evolving face of higher education is changing faster than the statements and policies. And there's also this broader, because the notion of academic freedom, the AAUP, comes out of this kind of elite higher education milieu, right? That's based on expertise. That's very much like we are experts, disciplinary experts, and not unionists, right? Not the AFT, not, and that you have this idea of academic of freedom being founded in professionalism and in expertise. And then we are living in a moment in which having been reading Foucault since the 1990s, we've learned to be critical of expertise and claims to power, right? So on the one hand, in the present moment, the notion of academic freedom becomes a very important shield, right, to defend the kind of claims and aspirations of higher education, but also kind of limited. So the technical thing the AAUP would say is that if you are a staff that's engaged in teaching or some sort of support for, like, if you're a librarian who's helping with research or lab tech, or you're engaged in research or teaching, like the core mission of the university, then your activities are protected by academic freedom. In the same way that if you're in a contingent faculty member, you should also have disciplinary hearings. You should not be retaliated against, right? That you should expect your position to be continually renewed unless there's cause to demonstrate that is not the case. But we know in practice that that's not how it works, right? That contingent faculty and staff have fewer protection. So again, it's that kind of aspiration of the aspirations of academic freedom and its political pressure and power that makes those aspirations more or less applicable on individual campuses.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the reason I ask it is because I do think it's important to talk about this with college student educators outside the classroom. And, for instance, many departments of residence life, for instance, have RAs or hall directors who have, as part of their job description, educational responsibilities, right? Like they're supposed to do things to educate students in their facilities about campus safety or sexual violence or a whole host of things. So same with intercollegiate athletics. Like all these people, they're doing educative work, but they're not actually teaching a class, right? So it's like we got to think about how to protect those people in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Fundamentally agree.
And the paper that Eli Meyerhoffen and I are working on that Tim noted is kind of looking at these kind of documents that have come out, the 1915, 1940 statement, the 1966 statement on governance, and the 1967 statement on student rights, and then the statements on unionization. And we're kind of noticing this kind of like we call it kind of a constitutional reinterpretation of academic freedom in these more expansive ways. So in a way that the AAUP's understanding of academic freedom is expanding, even if that primary constitutional document of the 1940 statement has these kinds of narrow understandings of faculty, that there's these kinds of implicit understandings of what that means that are also expanding as well. And I think that and in many places you have places where faculty supposedly have academic freedom and even tenure, and graduate students have graduate student unions, and because of that may even have more academic freedom than faculty who could be dismissed without recourse. So it's this interesting kind of issue. Thoughts or observations?
Not necessarily a question,
Yeah.
but I just want to say thanks for creating this resource for so many folks, because I can definitely see leveraging this for my classes and allowing them to engage with further reading. So it's nice to kind of see like this open source content that we can use. So really appreciate that. I'm going to definitely utilize it for the fall.
Great, excellent. And do let us know. There's going to be a feedback a form on there as well. So feel free, as you teach the syllabus, please have your students or fill it out yourself to kind of let us know what's working and what's not working. And if there's any topics you'd like to see added as well, that would be fantastic.
One of the things that we tried to do, and we're trying to do, because there's still some pieces that are a little bit of a work in progress, is trying to right size the amount of material that's there. As a collective CDAF, we could have come up with hundreds of readings that say, oh, you have to read all these, right? These are all great. How you can't understand this without reading these 19 books by tomorrow, and that's not helpful to anyone. And so we tried to really focus and narrow and provide some key pieces, but there's a lot more that's there on specific topics that we could add either additional modules or additional suggested readings on other pieces that we just didn't want to obfuscate through having too much material. We thought it'd be better to curate than put everything out there, but we don't know if we got to the right level.
Yeah. I just want to draw your attention to another set of resources that we have at the center. This is what we're calling an academic freedom field guide. And it's kind of an overview of the resources that are available. If you feel that academic freedom is being violated, where you can go to find different kinds of resources, both resources within the AAUP, like how you would appeal to the Department of Academic Freedom, Tenure, and Governance, for example, if you were summarily fired or sanctioned in some way, and how they would intervene or how they could intervene, how to find your chapter or organize a chapter on your own campus if you don't have an AAUP chapter. But we've also included this thing that we're calling the Academic Freedom First Aid Kit, which is really recognizing that right now a lot of faculty need legal help, need digital security help, need docs defense, need information about how to respond to FOIA requests and things like that. This kind of targeted harassment of faculty that's becoming pretty omnipresent under the current regime. So we were able to bring together and curate a bunch of these resources in those different categories. So feel free to, to circulate that widely. And it's just a kind of like, we all know, there's the National Lawyers Guild and Paralegal and these different legal groups, but this resource kind of defines what kinds of materials and what cases they take on, what's the best way to get in contact with them, and all of that. And kind of gives a kind of little overview to the resources that are available both within and outside the AAUP and the AFT. So.
One thing that just while there's a pause that is probably obvious, but just to mention, because right now higher education's in shock, country's in shock about what's going on with the Department of Ed, what's going on with a number of things. The idea for the center that Isaac had and Jorg had came well before the most recent presidential election, because these issues are important and extend beyond the federal actions now. Some of it was that the influence of states like Florida and DeSantis's act and the state level legislative attacks. Some of it was also the well-funded efforts to attack higher education more broadly that may have contributed to where we are now. And so there's a lot of our focus is on what's happening in Washington and what's coming out of Washington, but that can't be our only focus. And so we're trying to navigate as a center, but hopefully as an industry and as a community, multiple pressures and threats on academic freedom from inside and out, especially because one of the things that some of our work on academic freedom has looked at is universities leveraging crises for to make changes that they want to change, that they want to make that are unrelated. One of my favorite examples, I wrote a piece on retrenchment. At Tulane University, after Hurricane Katrina, the university reorganized. And it reorganized, got rid of some majors, got rid of some departments, merged some things. And it said it did it because of the financial necessity that Katrina created. In fact, Tulane was just fine. With insurance and with federal payouts, they didn't lose money through Katrina. And the plan that they instituted was a plan that the provost had proposed a few years before Katrina that the faculty had overwhelmingly voted down, that the university then used the emergency of Katrina to do anyway, right? And so a piece of what we need to, there are a lot of things we need to be thinking about, including that it's not just Washington, it's not just states, it's how crises can be leveraged to act against the faculty and student and it's larger society's interests. Are there other questions or comments?
In that case, thanks everybody for joining us today. If there's anything else, the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom exists as a resource. I'm happy to come and talk to your AAUP chapter, to talk to anybody on campus, and happy to collaborate on any kinds of projects to serve as a resource to help support your work on your campus and your professional associations or whatnot. So, the goal is to provide resources and partnerships and to support the folks who are doing the work of defending academic freedom, both on their campuses as well as in their classrooms. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac and Tim, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Such an important conversation, such great resources, and we're just really grateful for the partnership with the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, something that we need really now more than we have in a while. So thank you all so much for being here. We have this recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And I'll hang around for a few minutes in case anybody needs anything. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.